Welcome to the meeting of the Learning Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First item on our agenda, attendance. Any apologies for absence, please, Dom?
I've had apologies from Councillor Graham Smith and Mr Kerry Pendergast.
Any other apologies? Move on then to item 2, declarations of interest. I'd like to bring in Delith Harris, our legal officer. She could just go through the process for us, please. Thank you, Delith.
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to item 6, the attendance management in schools report. You'll note that the report talks about schools in general, so I'm not suggesting that members need to declare at this stage any interest in relation to particular schools. But if that item, when that item comes up, if members then start to talk about a particular school, then I would suggest you may want to consider declaring an interest at that point. For example, if you're a governor of that particular school, or if you've got any close family members, a close person associate at the school, either teaching there or as a pupil, then that would be a personal interest and you can declare it at that time. It's not prejudicial, so you will be able to stay and participate in the discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can we move on then to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of October. Can we take the minutes on block, pages from pages 5 to 13? Would somebody agree?
Madam Chair, there's something I'd like to just for a point of clarification. On page 9, 6.668, which is proposal 10, which is 6669, proposal 11, when I had to, which I left the room for. I'd just like to have something clarified on this about the school's counting service when it says had been grant funded. I'd like to please clarify who the grant has been, who's had the grant and who's receiving it, who's giving the grant and who's receiving it. Could you just clarify? Because it says grant funded, but I don't know who the grant is from and who the grant is given to.
That clarification on that item.
If you would, please.
Would you happy that it's a true record of the minute?
Apart from yes, well, I just had that clarified.
Okay.
It is a Welsh Government grant and it's provided directly to the local authority, which comes into the education service.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Can we move on then to the next item, item 4, which is the action sheet?
Just one more on point page 7.
Can you use your microphone?
Sorry. On point 6.62, the actual amount of named pupil funding is around £2.3 million. It's under there is 1.1 to 1.2, but it's actually around 2.3. 6.62 proposal 2, yeah.
Okay, if you're happy with that, we move on then to agenda item 4, which is the action sheet. You can see there, page 15. Page 16 and page 17. We're still awaiting responses on the last item, you can see there. Okay. We move on then to agenda item 5, which is the decisions of the executive for scrutiny and review. On the first page there we have the decisions of the Cabinet, decisions of the leader and executive member.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry,
Chair. On decisions of the Cabinet, decision 710 of 2014 about the EAS governance model, it's been approved. I don't recall seeing it in general circulation amongst governors or schools, to be honest, and I think it should be.
We can arrange for that to be circulated. It's in the public domain, so.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, any other matters there on page 23? Page 24. And decisions of the executive member for children and young people. comments or questions? If not, we'll move on to the main item on our agenda then, agenda item 6, attendance management in schools. This was an item that we've added to the work programme as part of our scrutiny committee on the 23rd of October. This subject came up and we thought it would be a useful item for members to look at as a position statement, and maybe we can look at it again when the policy is firmed up and it can come back to us then. Can I invite Darren Joseph and Graham Roberts to take their seats, please? Would you like to give us a very quick overview of the report before we go into members' set questions?
Thanks, Chair. Well, the report attempts to outline the current position in terms of absence management in schools, which basically, I think, from the head teacher's perspective, is that they require further support and clarification around procedures and policies, and consistency of application of procedures and policies in managing absence. So we've talked about this a number of times with the head teachers, most recently at a head teachers meeting a few weeks ago, and they actually tasked the Education Service and the HR department at that time to develop revised policies and procedures for implementation in April 15. So this report tries to outline what would be necessary to achieve that. And I think it's broken down really into 3 strands. The first is around supply cover procurement, where schools currently are able to, and actually will always be able to, procure supply themselves under delegated responsibility, but are doing so at the moment from around 17, 18 supply companies. The local authority actually has 2 preferred suppliers, New Directions and Randstad, but they are not that high up the list of schools in terms of usage. So the spend against supply companies actually is quite broadly spread, but other supply agencies are used more often than those 2 in a number of schools. So it's to look at that as a strand of work and to see whether the local authority can do something about procuring supply on behalf of schools or with schools in a collective approach to achieve economies of scales and efficiencies. It's also about absence insurance arrangements. So in a similar way, schools can currently purchase absence insurance cover through their own delegated school budget, and are doing so from various suppliers. And there's the potential again there for the local authority with the insurance officer expertise and procurement officer expertise to actually procure a suitable arrangement for schools that is flexible enough to suit all individual school needs, but generates a saving through economies, basically, because of the scale of the procurement. And then the wider issue, which I suppose Graham will want to come into, is then all around the absence management policies and processes and reporting, monitoring and recording of information in schools to enable good quality absence management. So the report basically outlines that as a position statement for now. And there's a proposal in there that we talked a little about as well at the schools forum last week around potentially procuring or getting a member of staff in on a limited time basis for a year or 2 or 3 or however long necessary, to try and look at those strands and drive down costs and obviously improve supply cover and supply absence arrangements. The issue with that is that there's very limited capacity in the Education Service, very limited capacity in the HR team, and we feel that without additional capacity, it would be a long road in terms of trying to deliver these improvements. It could be something that we would look at as an invest-to-save option. So, schools are spending hundreds of thousands and heading towards £1 million on supply cover and insurance arrangements. And it could be that there's an element of that is top slice to fund this, and then we can demonstrate over time how that sort of intervention has reduced costs and saved schools. And it may be that we could look with the authority to see whether there's any funding that we could sort of pump prime into that. But certainly at the Schools Forum, they were in agreement that we needed to look at it. They've agreed that a working group should be convened shortly, which is made up of head teachers and governors, pulling together all of these issues, working with procurement, HR, and an insurance officer. So that I think is it in a nutshell where we are at the moment. But there's a considerable amount of work required to get us to an improved position. And obviously from schools' perspectives, a very tight timescale in terms of delivery for April 15.
So can we just go back to the project plan, the outline project plan on the last page of the agenda, where it says June, July 2015. So you're hoping to have it up and running in April, did you say?
Well, it's a very tight timescale. At the back of the report, there's an appendix which sort of outlines the project.
Appendix 3. Yeah.
Yeah, Appendix 3 outlines the intended project plan. It runs on to June, July. The head teachers at their last meeting, as I say, suggested that April would be when they were looking for it to come in from the start of the financial year. But we feel that we'll probably need a little bit more time than that.
Okay, members, shall we open up then for questions? Councillor Rees?
So just to start off, how do schools currently report and manage their sickness absences?
At the moment, they do so in their own way. So there is no prescribed way in terms of how they do that.
Then how do we ensure all schools are implementing the corporate sickness policies?
And I think that is the nub of the issue. There is a schools policy in place, but there are no sort of firm processes and systems around it to enable schools to work to a prescribed manner.
Now, why is that?
I think really it's probably because the supply and the sickness absence policy hasn't been reviewed for a long time. And I think there are capacity issues in terms of HR, but it may well be that you would wish to come in on that, Graham.
Thank you. I think that for Darren and I, there may be a slightly different emphasis in terms of what we believe is in place. There is a set of procedures, and as Darren quite rightly says, they are somewhat out of date. And so as a result, they haven't been reviewed for a number of years, and when you read through those, there are areas of grey, or there are areas which are not explicitly covered within that policy. What has therefore been a priority for me, because in some ways that has applied in a wider sense outside of the schools area as well, across the corporate policy of the council. So what has been a priority for me is to try and look at that corporate policy and bring a greater clarity and clearer explanation to allow managers to actually manage in a consistent way sickness absence across the council. Now, that particular policy has been engaged with the trade unions, and bear in mind this is for corporate, it isn't the education one, and that has been discussed and agreed with trade unions. So there is a policy that has recently been reviewed. It's not implemented yet. There is training to be rolled out in January, but that provides a foundation that I would like to use in order to engage with teaching unions in order to say, is this applicable as an updated, a clearer, a simpler and more comprehensive policy that could be used going forward. So whilst I would accept there has been gaps going back, there are areas of grey which, as Darren has quite rightly said, have allowed differing interpretations to be adopted. We've already started on the path to try and improve that and rectify that and bring a greater consistency. So I think some of the things referred to in the report will actually enable that to happen. But I don't want to stray into other areas at this stage that you may want to question on. So perhaps I'll just park the answer there for the moment.
Okay. Councillor Cameron?
As you're probably aware, this meeting has come out of a number of discussions and meetings that we've had with various head teachers who have brought this forward as an area of concern. Looking at this, the one thing that strikes me was, or the two things that strike me were that the preferred supplier, we had a preferred supplier, the majority of schools were using that preferred supplier, and now we've got 6 different suppliers, and I suspect from that, the majority of schools are now no longer using that preferred supplier. I mean, what concerns me is now we go down this procurement route, we find another preferred supplier, and then we end up again 2 years down the line, the majority of schools aren't using it for. I mean, we need to know why schools have come out, stopped using that preferred supplier. We need to know, and therefore we need, that needs to be taken into account when we're looking for a new preferred supplier. I think the other thing is the matter of the insurances. I mean, I understand that originally a number of schools were going into the same insurances, but they've come out and they've looked for their own. So I think we need to understand exactly why the schools are doing this before we go ahead with a process that's going to find us in 5 years' time in exactly the same position we're in at the moment. Do you think that's a reasonable premise?
Yes, please, Chair. In terms of the original procurement exercise, it was carried out several years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, where we moved from a mutual scheme whereby all schools basically paid in a sum of money to the local authority, and the local authority managed that fund on their behalf. So basically, if a school was good at managing absence, they were effectively paying for somebody who had high levels of absence. Yeah? So when we talked about it with the school community, and also that fund overspent every year. So when we talked about it with the schools, they felt that that wasn't fair, and that we should look at a procured commercial arrangement. We did that on their behalf, and as we said, the preferred supplier at that time was a Best Insurance. Now, actually, there is still a large number of schools with them, but under delegated responsibility and local management of schools, schools are able to choose their own provider for anything. And what has happened, I think, over time is schools have gone to the market, as they should, to look at whether they're getting the best deal, and in individual cases have found a better deal by moving to someone else. The issue, I think, that we need to look at carefully is whether, using the expertise of the procurement officer and the insurance officer here, we could get a suitable arrangement or a suitable range of arrangements that all schools could access while benefiting from the economies of scale of putting the whole pot of money together.
Yeah, can I endorse what Darren said, really? It's one of the times that I'm quite willing to say that we've got a free market system that works in our favour, because you've got all these supply agencies out there, they're desperate for business, and they're quite willing to undercut each other to give us the best deals. Some of them are also, it's not just a case of how much a supply teacher costs for a day, it's the flexibility in terms of some supply agencies would insist you take someone for half a day or a full day. Others will literally go 2 hours, 1 hour, that kind of thing. You can cut your own deals. Then there's the issue of quality. Some supply agencies do seem to provide, for at least for your own school, a better quality, even though several teachers are registered at several agencies. So you've got that issue. And it's the same really with the insurance cover. You're given a quote for a year, you take the quote, and at the end of the year, you see if anyone's going to undercut it. And frequently, they'll undercut it. And it could be that you go to a different insurance group of people every single year to get the best possible deal you can. And again, there are different terms to the deal. Some will cover after the 3rd day, or the 4th day, or the 5th day. Some cover up to a maximum of 30 days for this, 20 days for that. And you've really just got to select what you think is the best deal for your school, the staff that you've got in your school, and you get your crystal ball out and think what's going to happen in the next 12 months, and you go for it. There's a free market out there, and you can make substantial savings by going to the, if you like, the right agency or company that suits your school.
Yeah, but you see my point. My point is there any, is it right then that we should spend the manpower and the effort to find insurers and to find procurement for supply teachers, and then, I mean, I know head teachers can do it, but is there any point in us spending that amount of resource, and effectively what is that amount of money, because officer time is money, in doing this exercise, if this is what head teachers are going to do?
The one thing I would say is, I'm not used to turning this on and off, the one thing I would say is that you probably have to do this exercise every year. As Darren said, this was last done 6 years ago. The market changes that quickly that if you're going to cut a deal for the whole authority, you're probably best trying to do it every single year, and you might end up getting a better deal from a different agency every single year. Because you have got, like, you know, there are a number of agencies out there.
Just quick, briefly, Chair. I can't disagree with any of that, but what I would say is that a school procuring either supply cover or insurance cover with £20,000 or £30,000 is not going to generate the offer that hundreds of thousands of pounds as a collective is going to. Similarly, where we have looked at individual school policies on behalf of individual schools, we haven't done a great deal of work on it, but we have looked at several schools' individual policies. There are always things that the local authority has been able to point out in terms of the way that insurance arrangement has been procured, either in terms of the number of days cover, or the staff that are covered, or the risk that is built into the insurance arrangement. So, I certainly think it would be worthwhile in doing the exercise. I think in particular, the absence management policy development reporting and monitoring, as well as the supply procurement, are two particular areas that would need some additional capacity. The review of insurance, I am hoping we will be able to do anyway, because I think it's something that's worthwhile doing. We've got the insurance expertise, we've got the procurement officer. I don't think it's a major piece of work. We've got all of the information in schools. It's just a case of us gathering it together. And it avoids, if we can get to a collective position, it avoids schools having to do this themselves and replicate the work of a couple of officers 30 or 40 times.
Any other comments? Sorry, can I bring Councillor Rees in? Sorry.
Just going to ask Mr. Conway if he thinks this process will actually save any money.
I'm not an expert on the free market, but I would imagine that if you did approach these agencies, as Darren did say, with the power of 7 comprehensive schools and I don't know how many primary schools, that's a fair amount of potential business there. But the point I would make is do it annually. That's what, and I would imagine if there's anything in scale, then you should be able to cut a better deal than the deals that we cut individually. But it isn't just about cost, it's about flexibility. Flexibility is a huge thing with supply cover, and some of the agencies are more flexible than others in giving you what you want. Sometimes we only need supply cover. We could have we could have 5 teachers off for an afternoon because there's a course somewhere the 5 teachers have to go to. And some agencies will give you that for an hour, others won't. They'll say, sorry, you've got to take half a day or a day. And it's that kind of flexibility that over a year can actually make a difference. But I do agree, I would imagine the power of 30-odd schools is greater than the power of just one.
And just to go a bit further, would you have any worries about the quality of the supply teachers that you would get from this new arrangement? Compared to flexibility, which would be a priority? That's
always an issue. And what we've done at Abersychan is, I can't speak for any of the other comprehensives because I don't know what they've done, is that we've employed more cover supervisors. We actually employ our own, especially as we're now in the Cymru Challenge. We've got access to funding, and we need that funding to cover teachers who are building capacity and so on. If you can get a cover supervisor in, 2 or 3 really good quality cover supervisors, that makes the biggest difference of all. It really does. They're on your books. There's always a risk that there'll be some days you haven't got anybody to cover. But because they're there all the time, children regard them as a member of staff. It's a real plus. But yes, you have to look at the quality of what would be provided. It is important. That, cost and flexibility, those are the 3 most important things.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One thing which concerns some of us is about that if, say, a certain school has a not particularly good record on sickness absence and might be considered to be a bad risk, which would this hopefully lead to less extreme costs for that school, or if they were just buying their own insurance and they were considered, and the insurance companies might not buy them, but might not be wishing to supply at a certain level, or at a certain level, because they were considered to be a bad risk.
I think your experience suggests that an insurer will provide insurance at some cost to any school, regardless of the particular circumstances. And I think, and this would be something that we would need to talk through with the working group in developing our options. But I don't think we would be looking at sort of spreading risk in any way across schools. So Abersychan's risk would remain Abersychan's risk, and so on. It's just that we would be able to benefit from the economies and from hopefully restricting to some extent the options of schools in terms of when cover kicks in and how and who is covered from which days, because I think at the moment we've got we've got 40 different insurance arrangements in every school, and there's probably we could distill that down to perhaps 5 or 10 that would be suitable for all schools but would benefit in terms of cost. And obviously the whole school pot of money being available would be the other significant benefit in trying to drive down costs. But we wouldn't be looking to pool all schools' risks into one and then spread the cost of that out over all schools. It would still be an individualised policy by school.
Sometimes the risks are they're almost applied directly to you anyway, because if you've got someone on a known, there's a known illness, they very often, none of them will cover you anyway. So they really, whichever company will give you the deal, they'll want a member of staff by member of staff account of their medical conditions effectively. If it's a pre-existing condition, you don't get cover. So if somebody has been off for a particular type of illness in 1 year, and they're off then the following year with exactly the same illness, you don't get cover. With a lot of you will get cover, but the premium you'll pay for that will be exorbitant. And again, this is where the old tailoring individual needs really does come in.
Could we just look at the point there that the head made about the cover supervisor? I mean, obviously that's covered at the moment by Schools Challenge Cymru, and that funding is going to run out soon. Would that be something the local authority could look at, cover supervisors, and that they could be a resource to schools, but then they could also be covering other schools as well? Would that be something? Or perhaps something we could look at, post-Williams with
It's something that we could look at as part of the review. I think the issue would be the logistics of trying to deploy those staff across schools. And literally the only funding that is available for this is school budget funding. So, you know, if you would envisage a situation whereby some schools or all schools were prepared to buy into an arrangement that was actually funding staff, you know, these cover supervisors directly, then yes, we could wrap an agreement around that in terms of how it would work. But practically and logistically, it may be difficult then in terms of deployment of staff to make that work in practice.
Yeah, can I add? Oh, sorry, Phil. Yeah, can I just add to that? Really, the beauty of a cover supervisor employed by the school is they're at your school and your school only. It's the continuity that strengthens them as members of staff that really makes the difference. Because I think maybe what you were suggesting was almost like a local authority pool. I mean, there'd be no advantage to that over the private companies. I wouldn't have thought so anyway.
Councillor Seaborn, did you?
Thank you, Chair. If we were to move to a single provider, would this include all sectors, Welsh language, faith and specialist schools?
Certainly the intention of the review would be to look at it across all schools, yes. We have got two preferred suppliers at the moment for supply cover, one for teaching, one for support staff, and they are able to provide staff in all of those categories, yes.
Okay, Councillor Curran.
Yeah. Sorry, because one of the major complaints that we're getting, I mean, admittedly we haven't spoken to all head teachers yet, but one of the complaints we're getting is that these supply staff are of variable quality. I mean, and obviously that's a significant concern. I mean, I understand what Mike said about the cover supervisors, if they're not actually based in a school. But having said that, if we could get together a base of cover supervisors, we'd at least know that they were, you know, well, presumably we could hope that they would not have that issue with variable quality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just think that in practice it would probably be very difficult to actually end up with a sufficient pool that was cost effective to meet schools' needs. I think in terms of the quality of supply, it'll come down to the discussions that we have with heads and governors, but heads obviously will be vital to it in describing their expectations. Because what we are trying to do, I think, is facilitate an arrangement on behalf of schools using expertise that's in the local authority to do so. But clearly, in terms of the teaching and learning experience, we're going to be reliant on our head teachers to describe to us what their expectations are, what the current environment is they're working within, and how we move it to a situation whereby that quality is controlled.
Any other comments? Councillor Curran.
Just to say that really, I mean, we're back to my original point really, because if we find one company that's going to be supplying the supply teachers, the first time a head teacher, or if a head teacher starts having that variable quality, they're going to, the next year they're going to drop out, and we're going to end up with back where we are a couple of years, 2 or 3 years down the line. We're going to end up back where we are. So I mean, I am trying to get this. I'm trying to tease out really whether this issue around. I mean, I can understand what you said about insurance. That makes sense because obviously we've got the capacity to do that. We really got the capacity now to try and find supply teachers. That, you know, is the capacity there within the authority, and is it worth trying to find that capacity in order to find ourselves in this position a couple of years down the line?
I don't think I can answer that at this point. I think, taking us back to the some of the figures and the information that's in the report, what we do know currently is that schools are using 17 different suppliers. And we know that quality is variable over them, and we know the price is variable. So, it would seem that there would be somewhere we could go and something we could look at in terms of trying to reach an arrangement that is tightly enough described and controlled to achieve better quality and better cost. And I would suggest it's worth looking at.
Oh, it is now. Right, I better declare my point. I'm governor at Abersucken School, which is where Mike comes from. So,
Can I just say, if you're going to discuss Abersucken School, I need to declare an interest because personal interest. I have a niece that works there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not. What I'm going to say will affect Abersucken, but it's not unique to Abersucken in my view. I think because we've got two quite separate issues. One is the cover that you need, the physical body in the school doing the work for an absent teacher. Each school would have to agree a common set of requirements because you'd need a common service level agreement for a single supplier. The cover of the cash to help pay for it is an entirely different thing because insurance companies don't supply cover. They supply money for you to pay people who do supply cover. So you've got to get your two sets of criteria fairly well married up for the whole authority. It's worth looking at. It'd be nice to see the economies of scale working. I think it would probably be easier on the insurance side, where the buying power of the authority might give you a better negotiating position. I think putting together the SLA for suppliers of teachers might be more complex because schools might then have quite different requirements and models. But it's worth looking at, Darren. I think, I was one of the ones who agreed last Friday we look at it. But I think we've got to look at it with very open eyes, because the point is, it sounds almost frivolous, I don't mean it this way, it's not about saving money, it's about value for money. And we've got to be sure when we've got a situation where we know the schools have got to get better, then it's got to be the case that when we have supply in, however financed, we're actually delivering the services we need to deliver.
Any other comments? Councillor Davies?
We've been about various other people getting involved. What about EAS? Could they be part of this, of the solution on this matter?
I'm trying to think from in terms of teaching and learning, they would clearly be of benefit in terms of helping us with expectations around the quality aspects of it. I think in terms of driving out the cost and the policy and improvement, then that is a local authority matter in working with the schools. Just on a sort of related point as well, I think, as I say, the supply insurance aspect, and I agree entirely with Ron, is probably something that is easier to look at and easier to demonstrate, ways of saving money and ways of doing things differently across the schools than the supply procurement in terms of cover arrangements. But that part of it, that is only part of the role that we are describing. The rest of the job is about ensuring that we've got an appropriate policy in place for schools, that they're very clear in terms of how to apply that. It's consistently applied. We've got the appropriate escalation system in place where we need it. There's an occupational health system that supports that. That, I think, is the major part of the work. The insurance is something that we can look at separately as a procurement exercise effectively, and similarly with the supply arrangements. So not to mislead anybody, basically, I just wanted to make that clear.
Just ask, do we know how our other neighbouring authorities manage this situation? What kind of policies and procedures have they got?
We don't know with great detail, but anecdotally, those who we've talked to, there is quite a mixed bag, really. Some are far more rigid in terms of their suppliers, and some have a fairly free form. So they could end up with perhaps 17 suppliers. I think something committee may want to think about is that we've tended to talk of one extreme or the other, i.e., is it the free market that we have at the moment, where undoubtedly there is the opportunity to get competitive pricing if you're comfortable with the quality? and that's given us a scenario with 17 potential suppliers at the moment. But the other extreme perhaps doesn't have to be one supplier. Perhaps it could be a small handful of suppliers which might, if the market was tested, give the benefits of both options to ensure there is sufficient coverage, some safeguards about quality, but would also enable those who are not benefiting at the moment from more competitive levels to perhaps benefit as well. So maybe just something else that in testing the market we might be able to tease out of the process.
Sorry, Mike, and then...
Yeah, if I can just endorse, I think, what Darren was saying a couple of minutes ago, really. If something could be negotiated to bring down the insurance premiums, great. We'll probably save a couple of grand. You're not going to resolve the supply situation issue. The biggest issue, as Glyn referred to a minute ago, is quality. That is the biggest issue. That won't be resolved. The one thing that you can really do to make a difference is get us a policy in place to manage sickness absence and hopefully reduce the need for supply cover, because that at the moment is completely it's unmanageable, to be quite honest. We at Abersac follow what we believe is the current council policy, and it's not really getting us anywhere in terms of managing long-term sickness, the referrals to OH, the problems we have there with delay, with, I think, quality service. These are the issues that really need to be addressed. And I think every head, you've got to be careful when you say I speak for the other heads, because there's, you ask, there's 7 different comprehensive schools. If you asked us all our favourite colour, you get 7 different colours. But I think on this issue, I think we'd all agree. This really is a major problem.
Councillor Brooks?
Yes, that was the very point, actually going too quick, that I wanted to make. Are we looking to review the right thing here? It's about the sickness and the absence and why, and giving a solution to that, because if that was to be resolved, which of course never will be in full, but if it were to be resolved in full, we wouldn't be discussing the other 2 subjects. So I think that the key is that where we need to be putting our efforts in at the present moment is the very point that has just been very eloquently made. A point that I just wanted to make: all of the governance of schools and everything has been passed to the governing bodies of schools. At the end of the day, they are ultimately accountable and responsible for anything that goes on in the school. Is that correct? Do I understand that to be correct? Right. So at the end of the day, if you have your head teacher, which is the chief executive of the school effectively, and they are able to achieve insurance policies at a level which is satisfactory to that particular individual and the individual's organisation. The same with the procurement of teachers. I'm wondering, why are we bothering as a council to get involved in that? Now, given that we are cutting cuts, and next year we'll be cutting cuts, and we'll be cutting the cuts again, why are we going up this route? Surely we need to be thinking in terms of the actual cause. And the cause is the sickness and the absence. And I believe myself that perhaps we should put those efforts into doing that in the first instance. I take account of what people have said about the insurance policy, and I do think that there is a possibility there based upon what's already been said. And the other point that I was too slow off the mark with what Graham was saying, there's no way in a million years would I ever agree to having one supplier for anything from anywhere. Because if anything went up the creek, you were up the creek with it. So the thing about it is, at the end of the day, it could well be 17 suppliers does seem a little bit high, but at the end of the day, if you were able to secure suppliers. A little less than that, but no way in a million years should we just have one. Because if something goes wrong with that particular organisation, everybody's has got a problem. So those are the points that I'd probably contribute at this stage. I know that this is ongoing work, but that's an opinion that I would raise with you.
Okay, thanks. We've moved on really to what I think is the absolute problem. But I did just wonder, since we're talking about having 16 or 17, do you think there is actually a direct correlation between cost and quality?
Well, I think at the moment it's difficult for us to say, because I think it's coming down to each individual school in terms of the way that they're procuring. So, it's something that head teachers can answer at the moment. Just going back to the earlier points that were made, I agree entirely that the major piece of work is around ensuring that we've got good quality policies and procedures and they're consistently applied. But I do think that with the cuts and the continuing cuts, and the fact that school budgets now are effectively cash limited in terms of that they're the same level as they were in last financial year for 15-16. We need to be looking at all areas together to try and achieve efficiencies and reinvest that funding in schools. So, and this is going off the point, but another example of some of the things that we talked about at the Schools Forum recently were energy savings. And again, schools currently pay for their energy bills themselves. There's limited monitoring information. There's all sorts of things that we could potentially look at as a local authority supporting schools to improve the efficiency of operation in schools, working with them. And it isn't something that would be imposed. It's something that hopefully we could show does generate the savings, and therefore would wish to be, that schools would wish to access that. So that's the only point I'd make in terms of coming back on the argument of why are we looking at there's £1 million being spent across insurance and supply cover. There's bound to be some savings that could be made by doing things differently and collectively.
Yes, Karen.
I mean, I think we've hit the point where I was trying to push us towards, in that, are we effectively spreading ourselves too thin in trying to do something with it? The insurance seems to me, you've assured me that we have the capacity to deal with that. But I don't want us to spread the LEA, and I mean, I know how tight it's getting at the centre now, at the level of the LEA. I don't want us to be spreading ourselves too thin, looking at this procurement issue, looking at the insurance issue, when the real issue is around absence management. I mean, I think Mike hit the nail on the head. We are getting from head teachers complaints about the procedures and about occupational health. And I think if we can sort those problems out, then we'll save more money in the long run than fiddling about looking for a better insurance policy and fiddling about looking for better and cheaper methods of procurement. Those are only marginal costs in some respects. And it isn't, I'm not that bothered about the cost. I know it's important to head teachers to have the budget and whatever, but I'm not that bothered. What concerns me is the children. And not having their teacher there makes a significantly more difference to them than the supply.
We just go back to the point that the head made there about occupational health. And how long is it on average for an individual to wait to see the occupational health therapist? And would there be any plans to perhaps look at working collaboratively with the fire and the police?
When I took up the post of head of HR, the referral times were 6 weeks. They're now down to 2 weeks. In addition, we have explored the quality of what comes out of occupational health, because that had been raised with me, both corporately and through schools engagement. And there are certain improvements that we have tried to bring in there as well. There is also an issue whereby the level of detail contained within the referral to occupational health wasn't sufficiently detailed in some cases to enable detailed diagnosis to be made. Now, there's an issue then in terms of, do occupational health simply give a suitably vague response, or do they ask for more detail to get the clarity? I think I would say it was probably the former to begin with, but I think it's moving towards the latter now. I still think there is scope for improvement there, though. The other point about collaborative work, then we have had some tentative discussion with some of our neighbours who have very different processes, and they vary from having no in-house staff whatsoever, so they simply buy in the service from outside, to having a very large team in-house, and we have instances of both those with neighbouring authorities who we've engaged with. So it is something that we've done some preliminary work on, but we haven't taken that any further in terms of saying, is there actually a different way we should now be providing this service? We felt the first step should be to improve the quality of the current service prior to just thinking in more detail about some of the other aspects of that.
Okay, can I bring Mike in?
Yeah, can I actually thank Graham, because it has been noted that there has been a speed up in the response time of OH. I wouldn't be able to quote as you did the precise figure there. The thing that concerns me in terms of OH, and it's a difficult thing. I'm not a medical person, it goes without saying. But I find there's a tendency that the OH reports are overly sympathetic towards the people that have been referred, and that the means of reintegrating people that have been off sick, the times that are suggested in terms of phased returns and so on are incredibly generous, and I just feel at times that OH bends over backwards to support the member of staff rather than the system. Now, I'd be loathed to think that the system became punitive, because at the end of the day, people that are referred, there are clear problems and they have to be addressed, and sometimes people are going through a very difficult part in their lives. But I just get this feeling, it's a gut feeling, that at times OH seems to be overly sympathetic, and that then prolongs the absence, it prolongs the return to work and everything, and that can be very frustrating. I don't know what can be done about that, but it is a concern.
Comments on that, Graham?
Yes, I do. And my comment is that I do recognise the phrase that perhaps the service can be overly sympathetic. And that's one of the byproducts, I think, of having the in-house service provision the way we have it at the moment. And that's why I think what we're finding is there are different models out there, and it's part of the reason why we explored some of those different models to see whether the balance was appropriate, because you want it to be objective, you want it to be independent, and you want it to be supportive to the employer and to the employee. And that balance is particularly important. Have we always got that balance right? Well, I would have to say I'm not sure that we have. We're trying to improve that. I'm still not sure it's quite where I would wish it to be. And so there is some more work that we could do in that area.
Councillor Seaborn and then Councillor Cameron, sorry.
Are there any trends or conditions that we should be aware of, example stress? If so, what support mechanisms are put in place in aid to aid these staff to return to the workplace?
The quality of the data we're now sort of harnessing and bringing together, I like to think is improving almost monthly in terms of what we can bring together, how we can analyse it across services and in terms of type of absence, length of absence, whether we have instances of people taking Mondays and Fridays off, for example, those sorts of things. We now have the reporting tools to get deeper into those. There are three main areas, I would say, where we do have higher percentages of absence than others. One is musculoskeletal conditions, and in particular probably back issues are one of the key areas. And that's perhaps no surprise where you either have individuals who are standing for long periods of the day, equally, perversely, when they're sitting for long periods of the day, but also some of the physical work that has to be done as well. There are also quite a high incidence of viral type infections or flu type things, which certainly in offices we haven't done sufficient analysis yet. This may be less so in schools, but certainly flu type and viruses which are airborne and which circulate in open plan offices. And the third category that I would put in as being more than proportionate, shall we say, is that of stress and depression. In that sense, some of these are pretty difficult to deal with. But what we do have is many managers have actually been on dealing with stress at work training courses, which also is about recognising the symptoms so that where appropriate instances can be referred. There is also a counselling service, a confidential counselling service that we have, which is used. And those are the sort of main two sort of mechanisms we use to try and support. If we identify such issues, then there is referral to occupational health. And in such instances, if they're severe enough, there can be individual counselling lined up for people rather than the confidential telephone counselling line. And we have had instances where people do have one-to-one sessions for a period of perhaps 6 sessions, which can be extended on occasion. So there's a number of mechanisms there, but I have to say that one of the things that you need to identify, if you can, is whether the absence in this latter category of stress or depression, whether that's actually about the work environment. Because it may not necessarily be, and it may be a combination of things. We find with the workforce that we have, increasingly, they are sandwiched in the middle, whereby not only do they have responsibilities for dependents of young age, but they also have responsibilities for older generation as well. And that can place a combination of factors on an individual who, with a busy work life as well, they have difficulties balancing those things. So it is about trying to understand and recognise some of the stressors, some of the reasons why these things are happening, and try and provide the support where we can do so.
Thank you, Nigel. How often do schools request HR support and advice?
On average, I couldn't say, but I mean there is support and advice being requested daily for a whole raft of things, which is HR related in its broadest sense. How much of that actually relates to individual cases of sickness, for example? I don't have volumes available, so I couldn't actually give you an average on a day-by-day basis.
Councillor Cameron, did you?
You briefly mentioned that different authorities actually kind of monitor this in different ways. Do you have any idea how we compare to other authorities about the actual level of sickness? In the authority particularly, and in schools, do they differ?
At an all-Wales level, I guess I come into this relatively recently, so I'm going on trends going back a little bit, but certainly from what I've seen, we're not in the top 50%, let's put it that way. We're in the bottom 50% in terms of our sickness absence. Now, one of the things that I've talked about is the quality of the data coming through. And I certainly have a view that we are probably capturing and reporting absence more effectively than we have done. And that's partly down to new technology and the tools that we've now got with the system that we have. So we are able to get into more granular detail in terms of being able to analyse and to examine that. I know the system we have, and I know that the system that some of our colleagues in other councils have. I wonder on the accuracy of some of the data I see from elsewhere, but that's what's submitted. So, I'd like to think we're slightly better than the league table would suggest, but we're in the bottom half at the moment. In terms of schools specifically, then I do not have data from other councils to be able to indicate where we stand, as it were, in that particular comparison.
Sorry, Councillor Cameron, you should come back.
Can I kind of ask a supplementary, but it is another question we thought of. You mentioned there about the quality of the reporting. How do we ensure that all schools are implementing the corporate sickness policy?
I've said earlier, I think the current policy, there's areas of grey, and there are areas which are not covered with sufficient clarity within the document. So it is perfectly understandable, to my mind, if head teachers and their senior staff say, well, the policy is silent on this, therefore, and I don't mean this in any sort of derogatory sense, but in certain aspects, they have to make it up as they go along. Which is far from satisfactory. It needs to be clear, and it needs to be a step-by-step approach. That what we have to recognise as HR professionals is that head teachers do not want to be looking at these things on a regular basis. That's not what they are there to do. So that when they are in the requirement to have to refer to such policy, it's easy and it's straightforward. And that is part of the philosophy that we've tried to develop in redoing the corporate strategy. Now, as I say, that's been through the unions and agreed with the trade unions, but it's that greater clarity that I would like to use as the basis to engage with education colleagues to try and move this one forward.
Councillor Karen.
Yeah, I'd like to ask one off the list as well. How does the Bradford factor work in practice?
A question, I think.
The Bradford factor is, it would be wrong to call it a measure. What it really does is a flag or an indicator which gives you an idea of where to start looking. And what it recognises is the fact that lots of short-term absences is probably more disruptive than somebody who perhaps has an operation, has 2 months recovery, and you can plan that sensibly. What is difficult to plan for is where you have individuals who might be in a Tuesday and a Thursday, and they're off Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so what the Bradford factor does is it gives additional weighting to the number of frequencies where somebody is off. So what it does is it takes the overall number of days absent, and then it multiplies it by the number of absences, but stay with me, the number of absences is squared to give it a heavier weighting. And the result of that is a numerical figure. And the numerical figure, you can put in whatever ranking or rating system you want. So you could say, well, we should be reviewing somebody when they hit a score of 100 or 500 or whatever. And you can use it in a very mechanistic way. We are not proposing that. What we're proposing to do is to use it as a flag, as an indicator, to be able to identify situations and circumstances that, as managers, we should be doing some more work, but not without fully understanding the details of the case. So it shouldn't just be mechanistic, because there can be a whole raft of reasons why somebody has had some absence. It's about understanding, but you have to start somewhere. And sometimes, this is just an extra tool to try and shed a little bit of light on why.
Can I just say, it might be difficult. We're asking questions, but the mic's not on for the answers. I don't know.
Okay. Ron, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and add to the points that were just made. We are talking about the management of sick leave. We're not talking about the reporting. Management of sick leave, from my memory of being a manager, is actually about changing behaviours. Sometimes it's about medical support, sometimes it's about social, psychiatric type support. But it is about reducing the damage to the organisation of the individual's absence. That sounds terribly harsh, but that's what it's about. That, to me, is why we need a policy with no or very little greys, because the one thing it has to be is reasonable. Because you are in the territory of people's employment conditions. You are in the territory of fair and unfair treatment. You are in the territory of tribunals. So it has to be a policy that is objective. So that's why you need measures. I mean, Bradford is one way of doing it. There are others, but there has to be measures, so there's no arbitrariness in there. There has to be clarity of framework, and there has to be agreement. This is an area where no one school, and I would probably venture no one authority can go entirely its own way. You're on almost, if not national, regional conditions of service level. And so you would need to have a policy that is seen to be comparable with others that are similar. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of local authorities, I confess. My background, as some of you know, is National Civil Service. So it had to be a single approach across the piece. That's what we need in terms of our new policy, to put it down. Something where no teacher, head of department, because this will go further down than the head teacher, will feel frightened of saying, I need to get this sorted about your absences. And this may not be pleasant for either of us, but there are things we have to do if this school is going to continue to do the things it needs to do. And if you can give us a policy with that degree of firmness, whether it's Torvine only or Torvine plus other schools in the consortium or whatever, then that, I'm sure, will be welcome to those who have to apply it.
Have you got any comments on that, Graham, Darren? We would obviously be consulting with the trade or are in consultation with the trade unions.
Yes. I mean, the principles around objectivity and clarity, I fully endorse, because I do think, in part, that has been missing. And that does create situations which are open to interpretation. So I think if that clarity and objectivity can be achieved, and what I know is that whatever I bring forward to engage with schools colleagues, they will have that at the forefront of their mind, and they will challenge that quite rightly, as they should do, because they know what they've been living with, they know what it is that they want to see improved.
Councillor Brooks.
Again, I must be quicker. So not quick enough. I was very interested to hear what had been said about the occupational health, and that things were moving along somewhat faster. I think you said that where people were off over any period of time now, you can request and get some sort of intervention within, I think you said, 2 weeks. And for me, that's really quite magnificent. From personal experience in another place of work for me, that was, for me, was one of the biggest issues, because I have to tell you that it wasn't into weeks, we were talking months. And this, for me, was why things weren't as good as they could have been. So I find that very refreshing to hear that, for me, that's moving from what you said was 6 weeks to 2 weeks. For me, I think that's quite magnificent, quite frankly. And you're to be congratulated on being able to have done that, in a new place and with your staff and everything. For me, that's good. One of the things, and I think I've shared it with the council once before, similar subject, different committee. One of the things that moved me would have been some 8 years ago. With the authority I was working for then, and I was commanded to go to on a course and everything. They had to do that with me because I always used to find a reason for not going to them. And I was quite moved by this particular course and what it was about in our capacities as managers and colleagues working together, was to have some awareness of the people that you were working with. And throughout the whole of this training, which was extremely moving, I have to tell you, it was not about what was going on in work. It was what about was going on at home. There must have been about 20 of us on this particular session. It was over many more people than that, I would add, and went on for best part of 9 months over the authority. But it was being aware, we would all know that there are people who go to work in any organisation, working for anybody, to get away from from being at home. There's nothing unusual about that. And you hit the nail on the head about people, their role as school teachers. Let's talk about school teachers just to identify at that level. Their role in life is to teach children, invariably up to about 19 years old, depending on where they are working. But of course, you hit the nail clearly on the head for me, is that within their own personal family lives and all the rest of this, they may well be managing many other major issues and objects, and looking after elderly members of the family, and the reverse of younger members of the family, for all a manner and a raft of things. And I think that one of the things it woke me up to, quite frankly, as a manager, was being aware of what people, they went round the room, they did, and invited people to bring some personal experience, I must admit. And it's the only one I will mention, because it really sent shivers down my spine. And that was it was a man, and he turned round and he said that he was called upon to, within his family, to take care of one of the elderly members of the family. Had sadly passed away, and he was asked to deal with all manners relating to the funeral. And in 9 months, that happened another 5 times to the same man. It what it did for me, because I had dealt with it because my mother had died the year earlier, and it made me think then, crikey, like, you know, I found that, shall we say, a bit of an experience, and here we have somebody having to do it 5 times. There were many others, actually, that followed around that issue there, all the way around the room, because everybody was from different departments quite deliberately.
Yeah, sorry, can I move you on? Sorry, have you got the question?
Well, the point is, the point is that that's the type of thing that we need to be looking for as well, because that has an impact upon people's ability to be able to do their job. And I wonder, and I ask the question, does this council do anything like that to investigate into that with staff as a whole, but we are talking about schools here today?
Would you like to comment on that, Graham? That's about staff's well-being, I suppose, and our policies on that as well.
There's a much wider issue there. I mean, there's 2 levels. One is the level of for managers to know what's going on within their team structures. And dependent on the size of the team, that can prove quite difficult. If you've got a primary school with perhaps only 8 or 10 teachers, then it's probable that that head teacher will be aware of what's happening and the background issues for members of staff. If you have a large comprehensive with 100 plus staff on the teaching side and you know, similar numbers on the support, makes it far more difficult to do. So it becomes more general then in terms of, I suppose, the values of the organisation and how the organisation views the work and home balance and the issues of well-being and keep fit and eating healthy and those sorts of things, which I think generally as a council we do quite well, but they're not specific things. The phrase horse, water and drink springs to mind, because however well we put these things out there, ultimately it's individual choice as to what people want to do. Could I just then, on that particular point, Chair, I mean, it was encouraging to note Councillor Brooks' comments about referral to occupational health going from 6 weeks to 2 weeks, and I thank him for that. What I would also say, being brutally realistic, is that that's only one part of the process. There's other parts of the process that I still don't feel are rapid enough, and there are still frustrations in that process where we need additional medical advice, opinion, support from the NHS. And that can take time, and it's outside of our control. And I think we don't do a very good job of explaining that so that you know, a head teacher who's waiting for information to come back is thinking, why is this taking so long? And if we simply communicated that more effectively, then I think that would help. Doesn't solve the problem, but it would help a little bit in understanding.
Councillor Karen.
Yeah, if I could ask about this reporting issue. Every school has to report its attendance for its children. And yet, it is unusual to see reports, other than to governors, for sickness absences in schools. Do you think this might be a way forward for schools? Because I think it's an equally important matter as children's absences.
Can I bring Darren in there? Darren?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think until IVO was brought in, I think it was very difficult for schools to access the information in a easily displayable and easily gatherable way, so that it could be presented in whatever format. Certainly the intention of this is to ensure that there is regular reporting of information, both to the senior management team in the school and the governing body. And the IVO system is now able to do that. Part of the issue, I think, for schools is training in terms of ensuring that staff are able to utilise the system in the appropriate way to access the reports and make them available. So that's one of the things I think that would come out of this review.
About that then, Darren. How many schools have had training on this?
As far as I'm aware, none at the moment.
When we introduced IVOR, potentially there were huge numbers of people who would need access to the absence part of the system. And what was done was there was a document which is this document, which is simply full of pictures, shall I say. They're screenshots, light on words, but very heavy on screenshots to enable people to walk through. So what we did was to circulate that to all those people who had a requirement to access this part of the system. We think it's relatively user-friendly and straightforward, and the feedback certainly we had from corporate users was that it was easy to follow. But there's nothing like refreshing that and following up, and where there is a call for it, doing some face-to-face work as well. So, as part of this next stage of work, we'd be more than happy to do that.
Sorry, Ron?
Really a quick point. I mean, obviously in any reporting and data system, it's like any form of benchmarking. We need to know that each school is entering the same stuff for the same thing, that we're getting apples and oranges in the right boxes.
Councillor Rees?
Just to pick up on Darren's point about informing school governing bodies of sickness absences of teachers, how sure are you that it's regularly reported to governors?
I'm pretty sure that at the moment it isn't regularly reported to governors in nearly all schools, simply because the information at the moment is very difficult for them to access, or they are not aware of the points Graham's just made around how it is accessible via the IVOR system. So it's again an issue of communication with schools and making them able to access the stuff that is actually available through the IVOR system.
Okay. Are there any more questions now, or do we think that we've exhausted? Councillor Davies?
Yes. In your issues and findings in 7.2, you talk here about employees with disabilities. So the question about it is, are all schools accessible for teachers who become disabled but are still able to work?
Well, all schools are required to have a strategic equality plan, which includes an accessibility part of it. So, yes, there would be arrangements in place in each school to ensure appropriate access.
To be any sort of adaptations or any special equipment, would the local authority pay for that, or would that have to come out of a school's budget?
I think it would depend on the type of adaptation and the availability of funds, but I know there have been instances in the past where the local authority has supported individual schools where there is a requirement to modify the building.
Again, very quick. I think it's certainly a fact that not every school and every area of every school is accessible. I could certainly say for Abersucken, there are bits of our school which are not accessible at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Cameron?
Yeah, I'm looking at Appendix 3, and I notice we've got a question there. Is the date January 14 in Appendix 3 correct? I'm assuming that it is correct. It is January 14. And having said that, loath as I am to be critical, I understand that it is 15, is it?
15. It is 15. A deliberate typo.
Right. But in that case, can I say, it does look to me that this is it's going to be, in that case, a pretty quick process. You're moving from 1 to 4 to 5 to 9 in 6 months. And perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I know what consultation with the school unions is like. Is this a realistic timescale?
Darren and I, we may have different views on this. I don't know. We've not discussed it in any great detail. My view is it's a challenging deadline. Having said that, I actually think if we were able, and I'm looking specifically at the policy and the procedure now, if we were able to adhere to this, the payback would be tremendous. I think the fact that it's difficult shouldn't put us off trying to do this. I'll regret having said that, because if you know, for genuine reasons, the dialogue takes longer, you know, I would also, countering my own argument, say it's important to get it right. So if it takes an extra month or two to get something that everybody is comfortable to work with, then that's probably more important than trying to artificially rush something through.
I understand that heads have asked if this could be in place for the new financial year.
They did, Chair. You know, I think it's been something that we have discussed around all of these issues with heads, while in the schools forum and governors and in all sorts of forums in education for many, many months. So I think the intention with the project plan, I'd agree entirely with Graham, it is challenging, but the intention is to try and put a fairly tight timescale on it so that it forces us to work to, you know, as closely to that as we can to get those necessary improvements in schools and to, you know, drive down the absence rates and improve absence management quickly.
Yvonne?
If I could just ask a general question, are we focusing our efforts on primary or secondary?
All schools. All schools, yeah.
And also, how will dedicated HR support be paid for?
The intention, and this is again something that we talked about with the schools forum, is to make it pay for itself. So using the supply spend currently across all schools to try to reach an agreement whereby we access some of that funding up front to pay for the post. And then demonstrate that through better absence management and policy development and the other things we talked about, drive down costs to enable it to be sustainable. Now that probably is a short-term thing, but hopefully after a short period of time, we've got the improved system, it's embedded, there's a system around monitoring it in place, and we've done the work around supply insurance and absence procurement. So the intention is that it would pay for itself. There is the possibility, and it's something that I need to talk about with Graham and others, to see whether we can access some upfront investor save monies from the council to support the initial implementation with it. But the intention would be that it would pay for itself through school funding.
Can you tell us how, when you've got the new policies in place, that we will envisage reporting sickness management back to schools?
I think there's a little bit of an open-ended question there. I mean, what we do at the moment is on a quarterly basis, we produce statistics which show absence across all of the service areas of the council. The education service area is now split between cleaning and catering, between central education and between schools. And the 2 quarters that have been completed so far this year, a complete breakdown, as you have seen in your papers, has been provided to the education management team as well. Now, that information can be produced, I suppose, in a more formal or structured way on a quarterly basis. What is also available, and this is probably where we need to do the work, is to encourage the individual schools through the IVOR system to be able to run their own data and report that directly to the governing bodies. And that could be done on a quarterly basis. It could actually be done on a monthly basis, although you can get data overload if you're not careful. So I think there are mechanisms there, and it's a question of how many of those mechanisms we want to use, and what the schools would like to see on a regular basis. So there are mechanisms there.
Are there any other questions? Just one last question.
Just one quick, if I could, Chair. And it's on you. Are we already in discussion with the unions? But I mean, have we got any preliminary discussions with the unions or the PSJCC? Is the PSJCC still set? Yeah.
Yes, it was on the agenda for the meeting about 2 months ago. It's not agenda for the meeting which is coming up next week, but I would imagine it will be back on the agenda for the meeting which will be arranged in February. So they're aware that we're looking at absence management policies. They're obviously aware that corporately there's a draft revised absence management policy, and we're hoping to base the school update heavily on that.
Okay. Well, I think we've exhausted all our questions, and I think now we're probably ready to come to some conclusions. So can I thank Graham and Darren for coming along and answering our questions. Thank you very much. Okay, would you like to take us through some of the points we've raised, Tom?
Yeah, I've got a few things jotted. Sorry, my mistake. So I've got a few things jotted down. Even before the item started, Councillor Thomas mentioned that this committee would probably like to receive the draft policy prior to it being adopted by the council, just to ensure that you don't feel anything's actually been lost and missed out. And at that time, I'm sure we'd be able to get somebody in from outside of Torvine to actually give their views on what's being presented. There were points made around the need to undertake the exercises not just once but on an annual basis around insurance and supply teachers to ensure we continue to get the best deal available to the council. We need to ensure that any new arrangements we enter into are flexible enough to accommodate all the different circumstances that schools have. So, the idea of having one provider for supply teachers and one provider for insurance premiums might be going a bit too far, and that a smaller select pool would perhaps be more appropriate.
I would say there that small and select core will obviously be improved upon if we move towards the Williams report, and because obviously the bigger the number of schools, then the more likelihood there is that we can find, and also a number of. When you're only trying for one small group of schools, it's difficult to get more than one provider. But when you're trying for a larger number of schools, it's easier to get 4 or 5.
A couple of other things I had jotted down. That head teachers are, at the heart of any decisions around supply teacher. Just to ensure really that we're looking at value for money rather than looking for the cheapest option. There was some discussion around the continuing need to look at the occupational health balance between the employee and the employer.
The working environment?
How?
The working environment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is a significant. There is a very significant difference between schools. I'm a governor of a school at the moment that's really struggling because there's no staff room, and that can be a difficult working environment because the teachers don't meet together often enough. So, I think that's an issue we need to look at.
couple more. There seemed to be sort of an open admission that no schools had actually received any training on IVOR.
Yeah.
And I think that probably needs to be rectified. And finally, sickness absence reporting in schools, in the main to governing bodies, does not seem to be taking place, and whether this committee could recommend that all governing bodies receive sickness reports on a regular basis. Termly.
I think some schools might get that. A school that I might be associated with gets it at every governor's meeting, staff and children alike.
Yeah, I mean, we get it at Abersucken, but I mean, the point is we all get the same data because we get whatever the school produces. Is it exactly the same as another governing body will get? I don't know.
Okay, are there any other comments that members wanted to?
The only thing I sort of add to that is that the governing bodies are help to understand how important this matter is when they come to consider, rather than just turn over a page.
Okay. Councillor Cameron, sorry.
The only other thing perhaps we haven't mentioned that Graham did stress, the policy's got to be user-friendly. They have got to be able to, it's got to be definite. Yeah.
And I think you'll be able to make that judgment when you receive the draft, hopefully.
Okay. Ron, did you?
Just a quick point. I mean, I didn't raise it at the meeting. I wish I had now, but maybe it's too general. It's my view, and it applies to all the heads I've met. I'm not just talking about Mike, but I know Mike more close. I think the training and preparation that leaders in schools get, either members of the senior leadership team or heads, in the general principles of HR management is inadequate. Teachers are well prepared to run the academic side and the pastoral side to some extent, but actually when push comes to shove, the HR support is always in the background. The person sitting opposite the member of staff is the manager. And it's not just schools. There's an awful lot of circumstances where people are just not prepared. And it may well be something that we could do internally, ask HR to put together a small basic principles of sickness management as part of the bringing in of the new policy.
Yeah, I think again, and again about because Graham actually said about the fact that we've got schools, the primary schools say they've got 10 children, 10 teachers, but the secondary school, it's I mean, a few people said about heads of department. I mean, some of them would have between 5 and 10 teachers under them. So I think that they are that they're extremely important, because the thing is that they're the people who are working with them day to day.
Can we just look at sort of 9.3 there and look at where we're saying about the employment of an officer, and would we like to recommend that maybe that could be looked at from the Invest to Save pot? Rather than making a contribution from schools? Yeah, so we would endorse that. Comments or recommendations we'd like to make? Are we happy for Tom to formulate these and circulate them for members, and have any other comments they can pass on? Okay. I think Tom would just like to inform us about the next meeting, the work plan.
At this point, I was hoping that Dermot would be able to sort of talk you through the items that were left on the work plan and advise you on what would be the best item to take next. Tentatively, we're going to look at the new teacher assessment policy that should be put in place now, and that was for the February meeting. I'm not sure whether the timing is right for that. I haven't had a chance to discuss this with Dermot. So there was that one, and there was also another item that was discussed during the second Schools Monitoring Committee around scrutinising the EAS commissioning agreement. So that, again, could be another potential item. I don't know whether you want to make the decision now or wait until we've got a chance to actually, well, I could speak to Dermot and then feed back to you, and we could do this over email. I mean, your hands, really.
Because it is important we get the timing right.
Yeah.
That's the issue there. We don't want to miss either of those.
Can I throw an idea in the pot? We had our improvement board at school this morning, and the issue crossed my mind. If we were talking about a February meeting, then potentially we could look at how effective has been the School Challenge Cymru interventions in our schools. Because by February we'll have had some of the early feedback on the kids sitting maths exams, etc. And it would be useful to know what the authority thought and what the authority had done and the EAS had done in order to bring together the effectiveness of the interventions. I know each board is looking for each school, but we do have an interest in the authority as a whole.
I think that could be a really good topic. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I think we do need to look at the teacher assessments and also the EAS commissioning, because I don't think that's something that we really scrutinised. So we do need somewhere we need to look at them.
There are timing issues.
Yeah.
If we leave it too long, they'll be there. And what was due to be discussed?
What was due to be discussed at this meeting? The Estin.
Got Estin as well.
Yeah, we might.
The issue about EAS commissioning has come out during our discussions with the schools. EAS are requiring schools to fund stuff that some of us would have expected them to be doing anyway.
We do need to be looking at quite a few meaty topics there for us. Okay. If you're happy then for that arrangement for Tom to formulate these and circulate them, and then we can put our comments in. Thank you very much for a very interesting scrutiny meeting.
So just to be clear, I'll go back to Dermot and see the lie of the land. As far as the feedback from Estin is concerned, that may just lend itself to me or us putting in a special meeting as soon as we know when we got the feedback. It could be done fairly short notice, and you'll have a chance then to get that feedback in a timely manner.
Thank you very much.